Tanshi Kiwa, hello, how are you all? Welcome to Homelands, originally broadcast on CFCR Community Radio 90.5 FM in Saskatoon, Homelands of the Métis and Treaty 6 Territory, CFCR.ca. This is your favorite auntie, Andrea Letting Cashoon. Call me Auntie Andy if you like, and I'll be your host today. I'm part settler, part relative, and 100% allied to everyone. I'm just me, not a card-carrying member of any Indigenous nation, but I'm loved, adopted by, and related to many, rejected by a few, but haters gonna hate, relators gonna relate. I have Indigenous family relations and may secretly love them a little bit more than all the rest, but only because they are the first peoples of this land who have welcomed all the guests. I am also Irish and a little Scandinavian with a serving of mystery, and that's the way I was raised, strongly decolonial with a strong sense of justice and a big related heart for all. I mostly relate to my Patosh Métis friends and family and culture and have continued to try and live that beautiful good life that Mio Pimatisawan. So from the fringes of the sash, I situate myself as relative and ally and welcome you, my listeners, as brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, cousins, relatives in the homelands. And today we welcome our relative, Jonina Kirton, who's joining us from the beautiful West Coast today. So hello, and I'll just give a little intro. She's a wonderful poet and writer, and we met some years ago, introduced by Betsy Warland, who had read both our writing and said, "You guys have to meet each other." And so that was kind of how that came about. And with that, I'll just turn it over and let you go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for that welcome. Wow, I just love what you said from the fringes of the sash, from the fringes of the sash. So poetic. That's amazing. Yes, so I am very, very happy to be with all of you. I'm coming to you from what today is known as New Westminster, BC. This is the land of many Coast Salish peoples. I haven't yet quite figured out up to 11, and I cannot pronounce all of the names. And I'm even finding out that native land is not necessarily correct. So I'm still trying to figure out this tiny little place that I'm in. It's a small little footprint outside of Vancouver. How many nations shared these lands? And I'm going to say, in part, that would have been, I am sure, because it's right by the Fraser River. And so the river would have been an important place for everyone. And I love the kinship and the fact that, we can't just say this is one nation's land, that it was shared by many. And I have a connection to these lands in a way, not just living here now. So my great 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 grandfather, Jean Baptiste Boucher, is also known as Wakan, brought Simon Fraser here. So the Fraser River is named after Simon Fraser. I'm not saying I'm proud of that necessarily, because we know what happened as a result of him bringing these people here. But he went on to live up in Fort St. James. So my ancestry is very, very, very mixed, and I'll get into that a bit later. But he was a Cree interpreter guide who worked for the Hudson Bay Company, as many of my family members did. So I feel a connection to these lands, and I feel a sense of responsibility beyond the fact that I live here, a responsibility that comes with knowing that he brought these people here. And I've often wondered if he had any idea what he was bringing. I'm going to guess probably not. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. I'm just going to cough. Take a second here. Got to clear my throat. I don't know. Auntie's getting old. Well, actually, I'm a grandmother now. Kookum. So I'm past the auntie phase, but I'm still getting used to that. So what I thought I would talk with you today about was writing, something that you and I share, Andrea. I remember meeting you first in person in Saskatoon when I made a trip out that way, and I attended your award ceremony that you were awarded. I'm having to read here. John V. Vick's long manuscript for your poetry collection. And I remember meeting you and going to that and getting to celebrate that with you. And we got to do one other thing too, right? We went to Maria Campbell's for some type of Métis storytelling event one afternoon. And so it's really wonderful to get to share those moments with you. And one of my favorite selfies ever is the one that we took out on the land there. Two big smiling Métis folks.
And we really do look like sisters in that photo, I've always thought.
Yeah, and you could see that we both have this sort of the similar kind of sense of humor, like that we find the same things kind of funny, which is one of the things I love the most about my Indigenous relatives. We get humor. We really do. So what I thought about when I thought about talking with you today, I was really excited and I really appreciate you having me. I was thinking about my journey as a writer. When I met you at that point, it was 2012. So I would have just been writing about 5 years, hadn't yet published a book, really hadn't published much of anything, and was really trying to figure out where I fit, not just as a writer, but as an Indigenous writer and as a Métis, because I was still feeling like I was coming home, which was part of the reason that I was there for that trip was to go to Batoche. And so this coming home and writing, becoming a writer late in life have been interwoven. And it's been a very interesting experience. In many ways, I wish I would have had a lot of things sorted out before I was writing. But what can I say? So my writing began, like the publishing end of things, began with my first book when I was 61. So I'll show you. And for those who can't see, I'll explain what I'm holding up. Oop, wrong book. Isn't that nice to have more than one? Page is Bone, Ink as Blood is the cover of this book, which is pinkish and reddish words. And it really reminds me of a map somehow, if you can see it. You can't see it probably that well here. And so that book was written as part of that journey as well. So I took that journey with you, and I also did another one going along from Alberta to Saskatchewan to Winnipeg, visiting can't even talk, head smashed in buffalo jump. That's a mouthful, isn't it? And going to Manusquewan and Lake Manitou and to Winnipeg and Batoche. So I did all these things trying to figure out, where am I? How do I fit with these lands? Who are my people? It's been very difficult to determine that. Yes, it's true. I have ancestry in the Red River Métis, but it's much more complicated than that. Much, much more complicated. So you've mentioned having other ancestries. I have Icelandic. My grandmother was 100% Icelandic. And if I remember right, you and I almost ended up with the same name. Didn't
Yes.
your mom want to name you Jonina?
Yes, she did. Yes. Yeah. So you were the first Jonina I met, but I knew that I almost was a Jonina. So I an Auntie Yo instead of Auntie Andy.
Well, that's
And funny,
fascinating.
yeah, and I actually am called Auntie Joe by my friends. So yeah. Yeah.
Fascinating, isn't it? So that we would meet. So that journey, um, I, I think of Gregory Schofield as my favorite poet, still is. And he was a big part of my understanding my identity, being a Métis poet, the kind of writing that I might want to do. And I'm not saying I write like him because, wow, wouldn't that be great? I love his writing, that rhythm that he gets in there. But he was really like, I call him my poet elder. He did not necessarily know that. I just followed him around because he used to live around here. And so I would follow. If he was doing a reading, I would go. Once he moved away, I would keep up with him on Facebook. And he said something that was really important, which fits with these books. I'll show the other two books in a minute. He said, these are my words for today. I've asked him if it's okay if I use that saying that I heard him say once, and he said yes. So I have his permission to use it. And that struck me as that's really what this journey with these books has been. These are my words for today. So when I wrote Pages Bone, that was my very, very limited understanding of my own ancestry and even of the history of this country. I did not know so many things. And so some of the things I've written, I would change now. There's a few cringeworthy moments over the years, but we're learning. We're all learning, and I really hope that we can be more careful with one another in that understanding that we are learning. We're doing our, utmost best most of the time, and sure, there might be some people who have some sort of unkind intent, but even for them, I actually hold out my heart to them because that's from pain, I believe. So I have been going through this journey with this writing, and I think more and more of writing is medicine. And that's something I talk about a lot. And I've been doing workshops of all sorts around writing as medicine with various communities. Not the exact same workshop, but just exploring that notion that writing can be medicine, and not just writing to publish, like writing as well, for just discovery, to claim your narrative, to really say, well, what word would I want to use to describe this pain? How would I want to explain it, or this joy? Um, to just become more familiar with your own story that you're telling yourself. And actually, sometimes you'll realize that that story is not the story you want to be telling. And so, my second book, speaking of that, was An Honest Woman. Hold this one up. It's kind of like a nod to the recovering New Ager, I believe, because it looks like it's got a bag on here. It's got a lot of colors. It's a very textured looking painting. And it's got a bag on here that looks like some New Agey woman might carry around with her groceries and books and whatever she's got in there. So it's quite sweet, actually. I love this cover. That's called An Honest Woman. And that turned out to be a Me Too book. So it is a book that I've kind of set aside a little bit in some ways because it's difficult to read from. I discovered after it was written that when it came time to do readings, I had to really search for a poem to read because I wasn't necessarily wanting to read all those poems, especially in a room with men. So that was a kind of an interesting experience with that book. I learned some things. It's called An Honest Woman because my Icelandic relatives, honesty's been on my mind. They're a little bit too honest, and so can I be, right? So I was thinking about that, but I was also thinking about how they say he'll make an honest woman of you, like the ridiculousness of that statement that says we're not honest until we have this man, we're not credible, we're not worthy. So it's a bit of a making fun of that in a way. And the fact that I am actually a little too honest at times, I've been working on that. And just the whole notion of how women's credibility is questioned. So the book looks at, it's basically a Me Too book. And so from there, you start thinking, well, what's next? What might I want to do? You as a writer, Andrea, do you find yourself at times where there's just nothing that comes to you, or are you constantly sort of in this mode where I know what I want to do next, or there's a list of what you want to do?
I find there's lulls, there's kind of peaks and troughs, and sometimes you're just in that I've heard it described as the kind of the dormitory period or the hibernation or the lull. There's kind of those ebbs and flows, and sometimes you're writing like crazy, and other times you're resting and you're gathering material and you're just kind of in that space where things are coming to you or not, right? There's that kind of space. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it's very potent space, really, if we can allow ourselves to lean into it. And so that's something I think a lot about with writing as medicine and how it fits with that as well, is that, so how do I evoke that writing? And what is it that I want to write about? Am I deciding, or are the ancestors deciding? Is the creator deciding? Is there some other force or energy? The muse, for some people, might think of it that way. So this feels like it's a collaboration. Like I never feel like I'm doing this alone. There's a collaboration, which is really somewhat like my childhood. As a trauma survivor, I did have to kind of keep my own company. And I had a big imagination. So, in a way, I collaborated always with the ancestors. I didn't call them that at that point. I didn't know even that word, if I can remember. I don't think I knew that word. It wasn't ever referenced. But I just knew someone was with me. And they felt indigenous. I can't explain why. It's a body thing. It's what I feel in my body. And now I know as moccasins and as dancing and even mouth, lips, words. Like there's this whole resonance with the Red River Métis or Métis-ness that was there all along, even though I wasn't exposed to it. And when I say that, that's not entirely true. I thought I wasn't exposed to it. But it turns out that I spent the first 6 years of my life with my great grandfather, Eli Godin, who was a fiddler who spoke Métis. I sat on his knee. Apparently, he would sing to me in Métis. So I have no conscious memory of that, but my body always remembered. And so this sort of ties back to that writing is medicine again, the body and writing, how they're connected, the body, land, all of it, how it's connected, and this exploration of that in my own ancestry. I love the way that you introduced yourself. Did it take you a while to figure out how to introduce yourself as well? Like,
Yeah, yeah, it's been a constant kind of we were kind of discussing bios and I was saying it's like the genre I hate the most. It's like I find it very difficult to kind of sum myself up and write about myself. And so even making that intro for Homelands, which I did a couple of years ago and I've kind of haven't changed it too much. I just kind of went, well, I want to situate myself and I want to kind of explain where I come from and how I see myself. And that line, haters gonna hate, relators gonna relate, always makes people laugh. But yeah, that's the way I feel about things, that I'm related to everybody who wants to be a relative kind of thing. You know.
and I think we share that sentiment. And so I've struggled with those parts of the writing world where uh, there's this particular expectation of how you might introduce yourself, providing all the labels, so I have chronic illness and a trauma survivor, and I'm not necessarily wanting to lead with all that.
Yeah.
But yet there was this no idea that we should locate ourselves and let people know, position ourselves. I think sometimes they call it that. So the land, of course, is part of that. And I mentioned the nations here. Um, this Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh is some of the nations, Kakite and Kwantlen. And then I recently found out that one of the nations I've been naming, which is why I'm not naming them all right now, is not right. So there's this constant adjustment that, is necessary, and it's in writing sometimes. So you're like, oh, geez, I put out inaccurate information into the world. And we're thinking so much of inaccurate information lately with disinformation. And I hate to be a part of that, but I know I have been at times, unknowingly. So apparently I thought that the Stolo Nation was part of these lands, and then I just met someone from the Stolo Nation who said, no, that's not so. Brad, I had to laugh. I mean, if we can't laugh at ourselves sometimes for our mistakes, for our humanness, for all the trying that we're doing, but yet we still have a hard time finding accurate information sometimes. There's no single source, and I thought, for example, native land was it, and that person just told me no. So it's kind of interesting. So we need to be constantly sort of in movement, which kind of fits with my third book, which I'll hold up now. And for those who can't see, it's got I love this book. It's called Standing in a River of Time. It's got a woman on it, which I think is supposed to be me. Um, and it's a beautiful orange, yellow, like lots of color, purple and silver gray hair. I wish my hair really looked like this. It's beautiful. And this book is really about standing in a river of time, literally that I am standing in a river of time. So thinking of time not in the way that other people think of time, like the mainstream world, colonized world. I had a Haida elder tell me, and I may not have this right, and unfortunately he's made the change of worlds, so I cannot confirm my information, but it hit me when he said, the river of time, the past is in front of us, like flowing away from us, and the future is behind us, coming towards us. And I thought, oh, I hope I've got that right. Again, I can't ask Woody. He's not here to ask. But that hit me, the differences in how we view time. Even I've heard of Maoris have spiral, the idea of time being spiral. And so this mainstream world, this colonized world that we live in thinks of time in a certain way. And I really love that notion of a river of time, whether it's the past being in the front or the back, that river of time, that I am part of this river of time that's flowing. And so the book is looking at my past and my ancestry. The other two are all poetry. This one's poetry and prose. And that was kind of risky, and bless my publisher's heart, because I was promising a book of poetry and brought them 200 and how many pages? 200 and something? 209. And a book of poetry is not 209 pages. So that probably wasn't on their budget. But also the categorizing of it now becomes an issue. So it's categorized as poetry, and I regret that. I think it probably would have been better off as memoir. But when I was writing it, it came out of me. It just came. And our common friend, Betsy Warland, she always told me to let the narrative lead. So this narrative was leading me. I believe it was the ancestors that were part of this narrative, and they wanted me to tell certain parts of my story more fully than a poem could tell it. But even so, still short and sweet. So some call it lyric prose. I think that's being generous. It's not that lyrical, but some of it is. And it was an interesting way to tell a story, to tell some of the details, the narrative details that don't come out well in a poem, and then have the poem. And I've had people say that sometimes the poems have more meaning for them this way. So in a way, you could say I would be introducing the poems with this narrative. It was hard to write.
And I really like that because when you do readings, you often do explain kind of context about the poem before you read it, and it really makes it so much richer. And so I like that you built that right into the text itself. Like I think that's really amazing. I think it would be I think it's a great genre. I think it's a great way to do a book.
I enjoy it, and apparently quite a few of us Métis seem to be doing that, and I'm not surprised. I can't think of other authors right now, but I'm not surprised because we are a weaving. So why wouldn't our book be a weaving of prose and poetry as well? And I also like to use notes because I really like to use the books for educating as well and sharing information about anything that I've got in the book. I like doing that. So are we nearing a break time? How much more time do we
We've
have?
got about maybe another 5 more minutes and then we'll head to the break. So yeah.
Okay, so why don't if I could put up a slide, and again, for those who can't see, I will do my best to explain what I've got up on the screen for you.
Yeah, and those who are interested, you can always come to our YouTube channel and find it, and you'll be able to watch the video as well. And if you're just tuning in, you're at 90.5 FM, CFCR in Saskatoon, and you're in Homelands. This is Auntie Andy speaking, and Jonina Kirton is here with us from BC. Go ahead, Jonina.
Thank you, Andrea. So this is just just a shot. It sort of looks like a leather photo album. I really love the idea of this being like a photo album. And the title that's on here is Writing is Medicine. And the subtitle is Taking Control of Your Narrative as a way of taking back one's power. I really do believe that it is a way of taking back our power. I'm going to switch screens. And this is just a forest. It's near me, Queen's Park. It's where I go when I'm writing. And like writing, standing there every time, there was a lot of crying. And so after the end of the day, I would walk to the forest just to kind of let things go, lay tobacco, talk to the ancestors, and ask the trees to sort of help me out a little bit. And it would spend time there. So to me, I really think a lot about softening our gaze and the need to do that. And this picture really symbolizes that to me. The sun can't quite get through all the trees. It's a very heavily forested, and there's a path. And then the words, an invitation to soften your gaze. And so to me, the forest always makes me feel like softening my gaze. There's something about the trees. And I feel poetry is the same. I feel poetry is asking us to soften our gaze. And I think in this world that's so harsh and so rushed and so busy that we really need to take those moments to soften our gaze, to not take everything apart the way that the colonized world likes to do. The labeling, the categorizing, our view is more round and soft. And you just let me know when we need to have a break, okay?
Yeah, yeah, I think you can keep going. We've got a couple more minutes here, so.
Okay. So the next screen is talking about myself being a person of between. That's a term that Betsy Warland, my writing mentor, uses. And on this screen, I have a picture of my beautiful mother, probably about 23, or probably shortly before she had me. And she's a beautiful white woman. She looks very sophisticated. She really was, even though she was from a poor farm in Saskatchewan, she still always seemed to know how to dress. She made her own clothing and she was very, very fancy, my mom. And in the middle is a picture of me as a baby. And on the right is my father. On the right, my father's wearing his Navy uniform, and he's this very handsome, very Métis looking man. Uh, like a lot of Métis people, he went to the Navy as an option because he didn't have a lot of options in life. And he was in the Korean War. And out of that came some really great things for him because he did, in the end, become an air traffic controller as a result of the time that he had in the Navy and working with radar. Me in the middle, I look Indigenous. Some people say I don't now. I'm older, I got gray hair. I've lived in Vancouver where there's no sun for months. And I definitely am not as dark as I was when I was a child. My mother would get stopped on the street and asked who I was. I did not even understand why that would be until many years later when I started learning about 60 Scoop and so on. And not just that we were different looking, but that also they probably wondered if she had got me through the paper. You know, who knows, right? So that disconnection, but living between these two worlds, the Icelanders who are maybe a little too honest, but really I think I've come to believe that honesty is more about practicality. They're very practical people. It's not about all your feelings. Let's just get this thing done, you know? And on the Métis side, very different about kinship. Not that they didn't have kinship on the other side, but it's very, again, that's practical. They all do business together. They literally own businesses together. On the right, it was with my dad, and it was a warm kitchen party environment in those homes. Very, very different. So walking between those two worlds was not easy, and I'm sure you can understand that. I noticed you talking about your preference for one side. I have the same preference. I want the kitchen party. Yes. Oh my goodness. So I apologize for the cough.
Yeah,
So
how are you doing with your cough? Is it clearing up or?
it's just coming and going. So I apologize if my voice gets a bit gravelly. Um, this now is one of those little things you get on ancestry.com when you had your blood work done and then they show you your relatives, right? And I only show it to just say that on the right is the Icelanders and a bunch of names. I won't name them. Some of them I wouldn't even know how to say, to be honest with you. There's a Reykjavik John there, which I think is kind of cool. Um, and then on the right is my other family members. Both of my grandparents were Red River Métis. So the Kirtons were, people don't realize that their Kirtons have some Métis. They think only of the French names normally. So my father was a Kirton, my grandmother was a Godin. So there was the French and the English. And they're literally, I think there's quite a difference between the two in terms of money, wealth, access to things. I believe the Kirtons are more recently Métis, but also seem to have more status or more access to money, let's just say. So
And
there is that difference. Yeah.
we're about at the halfway point, so we're going to take a quick break. So that concludes the first half hour of our Homelands this Saturday morning. We'll be right back on CFCR 90.5 FM with the second half. So don't turn that dial.